Is weird, odd, strange, or just plain bizarre is really your cup of tea? Then, the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast will give you that fix. Can't believe it? Well, listen for yourself as we deliver the strangest news you definitely won't find on CNN or Fox. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast.
Gary Newman is 13 days older than Gary Oldman. Welcome to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Crispy Caleb. Today's episode is going to be fairly similar to last Monday's episode. We are going to start off by jumping into a bunch of cool animal stories, including a Canadian goose that was found with an explosive taped to its body. Then we're going to go into some failed crime stories, as is a weekly tradition at this point. My favorite in that bunch is a plane that could not take off because it was too heavy due to the amount of cocaine packed on it. In the third segment, I'm going to give you some random weird news stories, including that Colorado Springs is declaring war on the F word. That's my hometown. Beautiful Colorado Springs. Finally, in the last segment, I'm going to give you my top 10 crazy geniuses, and I'll be focusing on the crazy part of them. So that'll be a heck of a lot of fun. Why don't you stay tuned for that? God dang it. All right, part 1, crazy animal stories. A goose in Canada was found with an explosive taped to its body. I've always heard that geese were used in wars, but I always thought that was for sending messages. So, kind of an interesting development to hear that they're now being used for transportation of high-grain explosives. Anyway, this goose was found by a man from Long Island, New York. It was found in Toronto, and the man was actually a member of PETA, the People for Ethical Treatment of Animals. Normally, I don't name any names in my stories, but I'm going to do it in this one just because he has a cool name. Leonardo, that's his last name. He said, quote, "I'm sure she was very trusting before this cruel person strapped a firecracker to her." So he's not happy about this duck being used for to strike fear into the Torontian people. I can sympathize with that. So after De Leonardo reported this goose to the police arrived and the bomb was safely removed from the bird. De Leonardo also said on Facebook that the firecracker appeared to have been lit, but it was also soaked in water. So he speculates that the perpetrator actually lit the fuse to the bomb, but that it scared the goose and caused it to run into water in fear. He went on to say that although the duck seemed to not be killed by the bomb, it was in fact injured by the tightly wrapped duct tape around its body. However, it was immediately taken to a vet where the bomb was removed. All injuries to the goose were repaired, and it was released last Friday night. The Toronto police station said that they are now worried that this person who attempted to kill the bird might try and harm another animal. They also fear the suspect's behavior may escalate. De Leonardo concludes his statements by saying, quote, "The FBI, medical professionals, and the police department have all well documented the link between animal abuse and human violence. So it's only a matter of time before this person escalates and harms another animal or a person." People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals is now offering a reward of $5,000 to anyone with information that could lead to an arrest. So to sum up the story, bombs are bad, geese are good. Don't bomb geese, people. Come on. Now, obviously this story isn't funny, even though it totally is. I can see why they're worried that this is a sign that somebody might hurt other humans, because, the whole Jeffrey Dahmer syndrome thing, taking dead animals into your house and taking apart their bones and stuff like that, is kind of a telltale sign that somebody's a sadistic serial killer. Today they're exploding geese, tomorrow they're hammering your head to a table. So, I think we should watch out for people attaching bombs to geese. In fact, they should make it illegal. Okay, moving on. A woman is crushed by a humpback whale in Australia tourist spot. The woman was 29 and she was not alone. She was actually with a tourist group down in the popular tourist area of Nagalo Reef. Unconfirmed reports say that the young woman was trapped between two giant humpback whales, which can grow up to 19 meters or 62 feet. She suffered fractured ribs and internal bleeding. Thankfully, she was transferred to a hospital and is in, quote, serious but stable condition. Now, when the Western Australian police interviewed the other people at the scene, the tour group says that they had only been, quote, a few hundred meters from the shore when the incident happened. A few hundred meters, so just a couple football fields away from any safety. Well, I guess Australian land isn't exactly safe. Nevertheless, it just doesn't seem safe to be swimming several football fields away from the shore while there are humpback whales and sharks and Loch Ness monsters all around. It could be dangerous, and I don't think insurance covers being crushed by a whale. Now, it should be noted that chartered swimming with humpback whales is currently undergoing a 5-year trial in the region, monitored by the Department of Biodiversity Conservation and Attractions, or the DBCA, if that's too long for you. What this means is that several tour operators have actually been given licenses in order to take tourists out into the ocean where they can be given guided swimming next to whales. The only regulation in place is that they must stay at least 15 meters from the animals at all time. Now, this doesn't make much sense to me. As stated earlier, the animals themselves are 19 meters long. So they're not even staying a full whale away from the whales. But in the DBCA's defense, it was, quote, working closely with the industry and the tour operator involved to understand how the incident occurred, and that swimming with humpback whales involved some inherent risks. Now, I think personally that swimming several hundred meters away from shore already incurs some inherent risks. Now, doing that with animals the size of buildings, who you're basically an ant in comparison with, does not lead to good results. I don't know if you guys ever heard the story of Jonah and the whale, but it doesn't end well. He gets eaten by a whale and then spit out on some hellish country. Fantastic story. I guess it wasn't a whale, it was a big fish. Anyways, it is said that nearly 10,000 participants have swum with the humpback whales since the trials began in 2016, and this is the first incidents to occur during the trials. Thankfully, this young lady is recovering, as previously stated, and now she'll have a great story. She survived an attack by 2 humpback whales. Try telling that to your boss to get off work. Okay. Next story. Animal rights group offers $5,000 reward for information on a vandalizer who placed a Republican campaign sticker on a bear. So this small black bear was wearing a tracking tag, which is just a collar with a giant doohickey on it. And on that goddamn doohickey, somebody put a sticker for support in the 2020 election for the incumbent president. Now, the people responsible for this tracking tag on the bear is called the Help Asheville Bears Organization, which I'm just going to call HAB from now on. After they put out a $5,000 reward for the person responsible for putting the sticker on the bear's tracker, one of the spokespeople for the HAB said, quote, I love this so much. They sent out a Facebook post that said, quote, whoever puts these political stickers on these bears is cruel and heartless. HAB and our followers hope to stop and expose you. This is now the second bear this happened to, which can only mean either someone in the study is doing this or it is someone in the public. Either way, a full investigation needs to be done. So even though the HAB is for putting trackers on bears, they're not for putting stickers on bears. In fact, they're quite vehemently against it. It should be noted that these bears actually, they roam in the wild. They're not in captivity. So whoever did this thought that it would be worth thought that it would be worth it to put a sticker on a bear, a wild bear, which is obviously fairly dangerous, but I think it's also kind of brave. You want your fella to win the election so badly that you'll put an advertisement on a bear. Now, apparently the bear was photographed in Asheville by a young lady who told the HAB that her bear was relaxing on her front porch last week. Apparently this bear is a regular visitor at this young lady's house. And she's actually quite upset at the HAB for putting collars on the bears, saying, quote, "I believe this is an abhorrent practicum. These bears are already suffering enough with the heavy collars and metal ear mutilations. But to put a political sticker on the collar, no words can describe my anger and sadness." So once again, she's more upset about the sticker than the mutilating of the bear's ear, which is just funny to me. In this modern age of outrage, right? You can't have a position unless you're outraged about it. People are being outraged more about stickers than they are about bears being shot by tranquilizers and have a collar put on them and having their ears I have to look up why their ears are being mutilated. Oh, so it looks like they just put tags inside the bear's ears so they can be recognized when they're shot by tranquilizers. But more outrage came to this situation when Dr. Chris DiPerno, who is part of the bear study program, he told a popular news site that researchers do not condone, quote, "anyone approaching a bear for any purpose. It is highly unethical to place any sticker on an animal." He goes on to say, "Unfortunately, somebody has habituated this bear to the point where it has lost its natural wariness of people, allowing this person to place the sticker on the collar. The person that has helped this bear become food dependent and habituated is putting humans and the safety of the bear at risk." So basically what he's saying, we have bears in Colorado, so I kind of get this. If bears get into trash, human trash at all, then all of a sudden that's all they will search for and eat, which just brings them closer to humans, which endangers humans and bears. And when you have to choose between the two, usually people choose humans to survive, so they usually end up shooting a bear, which is not great. So this doctor makes a few good points, saying that bears should not be taught by humans that it's okay for them to interact, because then somebody's going to end up getting hurt and the bear will be shot as a result, and it's just worse off for everybody. But I think the funny part of this story is that this isn't the first bear this has happened to. And it's also not the first bear this has happened to in Asheville. So apparently somebody is out there and they really think that it's going to make a campaign difference if they put these stickers on the bears. And I just think it's funny that people are freaking out rather than trying to find a solution to the problem. But I guess that they are offering the $5,000 reward for any information. So they're doing something about it. Hopefully they find this perp and put him and his family away for a long, long time. We should probably go to a break. So why don't you stay tuned? We have a couple more animal stories, then we're going to transition into some failed crime stories, including a plane that could not take off because the cocaine being smuggled on it was too heavy. So we'll get to that. Why don't you stay tuned, god dang it, and later on I'll give you my top 10 crazy geniuses. It'll be a heck of a time. Stay tuned for after the break.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Modern-day humans are closer in time to the Tyrannosaurus Rex than the Tyrannosaurus Rex is to the Stegosaurus. Apparently the Stegosaurus predates grass. That's fun. I looked a bit more deeply into this, And similarly, Cleopatra lived closer in time to the present day than the building of the Great Pyramids. Also, the last woolly mammoth died only 1,000 years after the building of the pyramids. So that's fun. Some weird timeline facts for you there. We're going to move on to my weird news stories. And I think this would be a perfect transition. Egypt tells Elon Musk that its pyramids were not built by aliens. So this is kind of a little joke between Elon Musk and the Egyptians. But earlier last week, Elon Musk sent out a tweet saying aliens built the Great Pyramids, obviously. In a retort, Egypt's international cooperation minister, who might be taking this a bit too seriously, said, quote, "Seeing the tombs of the pyramid builders would be proof that they were not built by aliens." So these tombs were discovered in the 1990s and are definitive evidence, experts say, that the magnificent structures were indeed built by the ancient Egyptians and not by aliens. Egypt's Minister of International Cooperation went on to say, quote, "I follow your work with a lot of admiration." She's saying this directly to Elon Musk. "I encourage you and SpaceX to explore the writings about how the pyramids were built, and also to check out the tombs of the pyramid builders. Mr. Musk, we are waiting for you." Now, another person taking this story too seriously is a Egyptian archaeologist who, in response to Mr. Musk's argument, said, quote, "It's a complete hallucination. I found the tombs of the pyramid builders that tell everyone that the builders of the pyramids are Egyptians and that they were not slaves." I don't know what that has to do with aliens, but that was his response to Elon Musk. People have lost their minds. I love it. Now, in order to de-escalate all the craziness that ensued from his tweet, Mr. Musk sent out a tweet with a link to a BBC article saying how the pyramids were historically completed. And he has also historically said in the past, quote, "Twitter is a war zone. If somebody's going to jump in the war zone, it's like, okay, you're in the arena, let's go." So, he's no stranger to criticism, obviously, and I think people need to stop taking things so seriously. That's the moral of this episode. You know, stickers on bear collars are not as bad as the actual collars or the tags in their ears. And saying the pyramids were built by aliens is not that big of a deal. It's obviously a joke. I don't understand when people actually take that seriously. And I just find it funny that these super intelligent aliens came to Earth and they're like, you know what we should do with our most superior intellect? Let's build some triangles. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Leave me a comment. I know Robbie Canton will. That's a call out. You have to leave me one now. And it has to be on the pyramids. Alright, time to start our weekly crimes, our failed weird news crimes of the week. We're going to get into the one that's a drug plane that couldn't take off because its cocaine was too heavy. But first we're going to dive into a rent dispute in which a tenant decapitated his landlord with a sword. Sounds like a Coen Brothers climax. Alright. So this began in Connecticut when a man was told that he had to move out because of his overdue rent. The police responded to a 911 call Saturday morning when a man, 42 years of age, was, quote, waving a sword at him in threatening and terrorizing manner. This was a result of a rent dispute, and the police did nothing about it. The next day, police received other calls from the man's neighbor, the landlord's neighbor, saying that they feared for his safety. As a result of this second call, the police got a warrant and entered the residence Sunday afternoon to find a grisly crime scene with the landlord's body, quote, covered by numerous articles of bedding. The medical examiner on the scene said that the man's injuries were consistent with large-edged weapons, noting that, quote, lacerations to the landlord's right arm, upper chest, and across the neck caused decapitation. The police then took a look at the surveillance videos, which caught a, quote, white man exiting a white Jeep carrying a long, skinny, white object in his right hand, who then entered the residence Saturday afternoon and exited 30 minutes later with the same object. So naturally the police went and found this young man with the sword and questioned him, but he refused to speak. He simply wrote on a sheet of paper, quote, "Paper in glove compartment in Jeep is all you need." A bit cryptic, but, he wants to do this like a movie's third act, so we'll keep going with it. We'll play along. But this meant that the police had to find another search warrant. And once they did, they entered the Jeep and found paperwork suggesting that Thompson believed he was a sovereign citizen, which is basically an individual that believes he is not subject to any statutes and interprets the law in their own way. Now, this is kind of sad. When they interviewed the landlord's cousin, the dead landlord's cousin, he said, quote, "He was one of the good guys, one that would never hurt a soul, one that would always reach out and help others. He was pleasant as can be, always seemed to be happy. He was just a joy to be around." Not really any jokes there, just kind of want to ground it in reality for you folks. Okay, now we're going to make a joke. King was also an accomplished bridge player as well. His cousin noted, quote, "He was very good at it, very good at teaching others to play it, just kind of a gentle person whose first love was bridge." It's just a really odd topic to come up during a police interview. But whatever. This made me question my own life. If I was killed, what would my cousin tell the police? I think he would tell the police, Caleb, say what you will, he liked Count Chocula. That's all I really have going for me. Anyways, shortly after the man with the sword was charged with murder, detectives and members of the Hartford police team discovered the suspect's murder weapon about 10 miles away. Buried with it, they found the couple's rental agreement, which is now evidence in the trial for the young man's motive. He has been detained in lieu of a $2 million bond before his next court appearance, which is in about 15 days, according to the recording and State Department of Corrections. So he will be tried by a jury of his peers and most likely found guilty. There's not a lot to go on here. He doesn't have an attorney and he is refusing to have one. So pretty open shut case if you ask me. Alright, next story. I'm going to call this one Confessions from a Serial Killer Grandpa. Apparently this 58-year-old grandpa confessed so many murders to the police that they could not keep up, saying, quote, "I'm going to be honest with you. I've killed a lot of people, several people, in your county, okay? There was a reason for them, and somebody had to take them out. Now, it should be noted that he's kind of an anti-hero. He's not just a serial killer, so some might think he's a good guy, some might think he's a bad guy, as many of his victims had been hurting women and children. He was also hired for murder, apparently. One detective says that he said, quote, "One of my victims had stolen 10 kilos of cocaine. The person they stole from, in response, went out and hired the best." So he thinks pretty highly of himself, and that actually happened in Florida. That one little cocaine killing happened in Florida, making this my Florida story of the week. The grandpa went on to say, quote, "If I didn't do the job, somebody was going to do it, and I'm going to be honest with you. We do not all think the same thing. Some hitmen will knock the door down and kill everybody. I'm not like that. I respect family." And he actually lives up to that family man title. And as he confessed to dozens of murders across the county, he said, "Please don't drag my family into this. That's all I'm asking of you, okay?" He went on to say that his family thought he was the nicest person in the world. Maybe they were just playing nice because they knew their grandpa was a serial killer. I'd play nice around him too. Now, apparently this man's murder spree started about 30 years ago, so he's been getting away with it with a long time, so maybe he is the best. Now, eventually this grandfather was interviewed by a young lady in his prison cell. She told him that she was, quote, "curious, too, about how he could come to kill without remorse. Sometimes it seemed even with relish, and at the same time be so generous towards his own family. Why have you murdered so many people, and how have you gotten away with it?" The murderer took a while and then laughed ruefully, quote, "It's a long story." He then read her his 400-page memoir. which the young lady said, quote, does not hide the fact that he is brutally, remorselessly violent. So I'm now going to read you one of the serial killer stories. So it involves a death, believe it or not. So if you don't want to hear about that, you can skip ahead about 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, and I'll be on to either a different story or a different segment altogether, and we can move on together through this beautiful weird news day. But for now, I'm gonna get into this kind of beautiful story in which the serial kind of paints his life like it's a film. So when the serial killer was younger, he had not yet killed anyone. He was just drug smuggling, and one day he was backing out of his driveway and he ran over his son. Apparently the little boy was okay. However, the serial killer was traumatized and declared that no one, and he meant, quote, no one was able to park in his driveway anymore. He even put up signs to make sure of this. One day, a man in a brown Ford pickup drove into his driveway and started hanging out with one of his wife's friends. The serial killer said, hey man, next time when you come to this house, can you please park your truck in the street? A week later, and the serial killer came back outside and noticed the brown pickup parked in the driveway once again. He repeated the warning, and nevertheless, a few weeks later, the brown truck once again pulled into his driveway. He then told the man who parked in his driveway, can I get a ride to the store? The young man in the brown pickup truck said, sure. The serial killer then said in his head, quote, your ass is mine, you stupid son of a bitch. The serial killer asked if the truck driver could bring him to a store using the back roads, and the truck driver obliged. According to the serial killer, the back streets were completely empty. During the drive, the serial killer asked him many personal questions about his own life. The truck driver told him he was from Mexico, had a mother and sister, and he was married but had no children. He was visiting America from Mexico in order to attend the funeral of his recently widowed sister-in-law. In response, the serial killer said, so, how come you don't listen to people when they ask you not to do things like park in the driveway? The young man responded, quote, I only listen to my parents. The serial killer responded, quote, that's a disrespectful answer. He then pulled out his .44 caliber gun and shot the young man in the head. After moving the body to the back of the truck, he said, quote, I am not your parents, but when I talk, people listen to me. The serial killer then finished his trip to the store, where a man questioned him on the blood dripping out from the back of the truck. And the serial killer said, oh yeah, my granddaughter spilled her strawberry drink. This is all in his 400-page memoir. He's clearly a crazy person. That is not one of his good kills, but he also says most of them were for people who were abusing women and children. I suppose those are, debatable. I don't think I'm allowed to endorse his activity on here. So I'm going to leave it up to you, the listener. Anyways, it's the end of this segment. Stay tuned for the next segment. We'll finish up my failed crimes of the week, and then we will move into my top 10 crazy geniuses. So why don't you do me a favor and stay tuned, by God.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Female reindeer keep their antlers in winter, not males. Which means Rudolph, Dasher, Dancer, Prancer, Vixen, Comet, Cupid, Donner, and Blitzen are all chicks. In retrospect, I probably should have done that for the animal segment. But anyways, welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. We just talked about a serial killer. One day I'm going to do my top 10 serial killer stories, if GSMC will let me. Anyway, for now, we're going to talk about drugs on a plane that were too heavy for the plane to take off. Apparently, this plane was packed with $80 million worth of cocaine and tried to take off from an Australian airport. However, it crashed due to the weight of the drug. Allegedly, there were 500 kilograms of cocaine on board the plane before it took off, which is a little over 1,100 pounds. This was only a problem because it was a relatively small plane trying to take off, and the police said it was like trying to fit a horse onto a small propeller plane. The police similarly alleged, quote, the plane had already taken off, flown illegally at a low height, and landed in North Queensland to avoid radar detection. The AFP, which is the Australian flight something or other, said, quote, the AFP alleges greed played a significant part in the syndicate's activities and cannot rule out that the weight of the cocaine had an impact on the plane's ability to take off. So they think that greed is the sins that took down this plane. Which, if you think about it, means that greed actually brought justice to the situation. So once again, the Australians have proved that greed is the right way to handle problems. The Royal Papua New Guinea Constabulary seized the drugs after a 6-day search in the jungle, so it was quite a disastrous crash of the plane as it took 6 days to find the drugs. There are 5 individuals of the crime syndicate who face multiple charges for trying to import the drugs. They face life imprisonment. They are also said to be linked to Italian organized crime, and apparently they were traveling to Sydney near the Cairns to import the said cocaine. Here's the funny part of the police statement. It is said that, quote, the drugs will be driven to Victoria in the back of a truck hidden in a load of Gyproc. So I don't know what any of that means, but it's perfectly Australian. Basically, a summary is that they are driving these 500 kilograms of cocaine in the back of a pickup truck. Nothing could possibly go wrong there. One of the deputies said, quote, these arrests prove no matter how sophisticated or opportunistic organized crimes attempts are, law enforcement is keeping pace and causing maximum damage to these criminal ventures. Australian governments have an optimistic look on the drug fight, saying that this is the end of a 2-year multi-agency drug operation. They go on to say, quote, with current interstate travel restrictions in place due to COVID-19, the attempt to import illicit drugs to Australia shows how opportunistic and greedy organized crime can be. That's the problem, is that they're greedy. Not because they're selling drugs to children, but they're greedy. They go on to say, quote, Australian law enforcement remains committed to working collectively to protect Australia, which is especially important now, due to the ongoing impact of the pandemic on the community. The 5 captured men will face a hearing on August 10th. It should be said that the pilot of the plane is, he's not being tried for, attempting to ship 500 kilograms of cocaine. He is instead being arrested and charged with an immigration offense. Because he's not from Australia, and due to COVID, they're not letting anyone not from Australia into the country, so he's being charged with that rather than smuggling drugs, which I think is kind of a funny, great way to end this little canard. We're going to move on now. So this next story is my second Florida story of the week. Basically what happened is a guy had a complete mental breakdown, ran onto the highway, jumped on a semi-truck's hood, and continued to hold on while smashing the man's windshield. But there's a lot more to this story, so let's go back to the beginning. So this began last Saturday, and the man who went crazy was driving a passenger who ended up calling the police, saying that the driver, quote, began acting strange. The driver then pulled over to the side of the highway. First, he climbed over the median and slowed down traffic simply by his presence. He then jumped onto the top of a slowly moving semi-tractor trailer and began beating on the windshield with his hands. The semi-truck continued driving northbound for about 10 miles from milepost 86 to 95. Now, there's actually a video on the internet which is very entertaining to watch, and it shows the man in the semi-truck violently waving his wheel back and forth in order to shake off the man. Instead of just pulling over, the truck driver tries to shake him off while driving at about, looks like 45 miles per hour. The man on the hood of the truck is wearing just sneakers, underwear, and a shirt that is being blown up by the wind. He continues to punch the semi-truck driver's windscreen, which actually has several cracked dents in it. So that's pretty amazing. He's probably on some kind of drug that makes it so he can't feel the pain of that, because his hand would be just shattered. I encourage you to go online and watch the video of this. It's pretty entertaining. The guy on the hood shouts at the person recording to call the police, and then he continues punching the semi-truck driver's hood. Eventually, a state trooper stopped the truck and detained the person who jumped on the hood. He has been taken to Wellington Regional Hospital, and the FHP continues to investigate the incident. Now, the man who jumped on the truck actually blames the truck driver for the violence in this incident. But as old ancient law dictates, the man who jumped on the truck started it. He jumped on the truck and started beating the windshield before the truck driver took off, and the truck driver was not willing to stop by the man's wishes. He simply just wanted to shake him off, which probably would have killed the man, so he probably overreacted in his retort. However, I do sympathize with the truck driver. I would be upset too if I was working a long, hard day just driving a truck and somebody jumped on my windshield and started vandalizing it. I might not want to kill him like that last serial killer in the last segment would have, or like this truck driver tried to. Thankfully, the police got there before anybody got seriously hurt, and hopefully this troubled man who jumped on the truck will find the care and help he needs at the hospital. Alright, that's the end for our crime stories. We're going to go into some random ones now. We're going to start with a team of treasure hunters that used metal detectors to find $130,000 worth of coins. So that's pretty amazing. I know whenever I go to the beach, I'm from Colorado, so I don't go to the beach very often. But when I do, I always see those goofy looking people with the metal detectors. And they always find like an aluminum can or something. But apparently these four British gentlemen went behind their old British pub and found an estimated $130,000 worth of coins that date between the 15th and 17th centuries. They didn't actually own the pub, but they received permission from the property owners to search in their 15-acre field behind their pub. Now, it shouldn't be said that they just magically came across these. They actually put in a lot of hard work. They all used metal detectors, and it took them 3 days before they found a single item of value. But when they did, they found 1,061 silver hammered coins. So this was back when coins needed to be hammered in order to have their distinct shape. Once appraised by an expert, they found out that their pile was worth $130,000. And that's not just their total value, that is their auction value. So it could be a little lower, it could be a little higher. Nobody really knows. When interviewed, the leader of the metal detector group said that this was, quote, the biggest hoard he has found in his entire life. He went on to say, quote, we did some detecting in the morning and found a beautiful gold coin and a little sixpence, and then we went and had a lunch at the pub. We went back out to the fields, and almost immediately I hit a signal and I pulled out a Charles I coin. Then I hit another signal and another. They were everywhere. It was pandemonium. After 10 minutes of searching, I hit this massive signal and I thought, this is it. We dug and saw the pot. That feeling of scraping the dirt away and seeing the coins is indescribable. As previously stated, they ended up finding 1,078 silver hammered coins. When asked about the coins, experts said, quote, the coins were most likely stashed in a field by wealthy landlords who had gone off to fight in the English Civil War. The man said that he couldn't fall asleep and, quote, I waited in my car watching all night, making sure no one tried to sneak in and take the hoard. Even now I'm a bit paranoid. Now I searched long and hard, high and low, but I couldn't find out whether or not these This group of metal detector people actually gave some money back to the pub. It seems only appropriate. The pub let them search their property, and the coins were found on their property. So I'm curious as to whether some of the money made its way back to the people who actually technically own the coins. But I see no mention of that, so I assume that the group of treasure hunters is going to keep the entire 130,000. But I don't think the pub will let this slide quietly. They'll probably come to an agreement, as would be the most rational and peaceful way to handle the situation. But that is up to them. Okay, we're going to end on a local story. If you're where I'm at, that's Colorado Springs. I'm probably the only person who listens to this podcast that is from Colorado Springs, but I still find it kind of funny, as Colorado Springs is suing for declaring war on the word I'm going to bleep that out, so for those who couldn't put this together, that's the F word. So this all began with the world-famous poker player Michael Sexton, who sued the city of Colorado Springs after he flipped them off and shouted, "F the police." Except he didn't say F, obviously. He said the full word. And as a lettered response said from the police, quote, "I'm more than happy to have you stand there and yell. However, yelling the F word like that is coarse and offensive language." Sexton responded, quote, "Do you want to lose in court? Do you really want to take that to court and lose in court?" A bit repetitive. "That will not stand up in federal court. The Supreme Court will slap you in the face. Thank you." The city responded, quote, "The Colorado Springs Police Department appreciates Westworld reaching out to our organization to discuss this incident, but we are unable to speak on the matter as it is under litigation." Sexton was arrested for his outburst, and many representatives of free speech are saying that this is an obvious free speech violation. One of them said, quote, "It is not the first time Colorado Springs officials have arrested and maliciously prosecuted Mr. Sexton and others for simply criticizing them." Now, although the fight for free speech is one I sympathize with, it should be noted that Sexton is a provocateur, specifically of the Colorado Springs police. He has a YouTube channel called Pikes Peak Auditors, where he basically just goes around messing with police. Clearly, there's a line between being able to say anything and actually stopping police from their work with your obscenities. Where that line is drawn is up to the jury. And we're going to end this with a quote from one of Sexton's attorneys who says, quote, "There is little separating authoritarian regimes and Colorado Springs when it comes to censoring individuals for criticizing the government. The First Amendment is under attack in Colorado Springs, and citizens like Mr. Sexton who are willing to stand up for their rights are the only bulwark against Colorado Springs' repeated tyranny." So, obviously more about this case needs to come out before we make any complete judgments on it. Obviously, we have complete freedom of speech in America, but you also don't get to harass people, even if they're police officers. But we'll see how this turns out. Let me know in the comments what you think. It's a pretty polarizing issue. I tend to always side with the First Amendment, but we'll see. Alright, stay tuned for the next segment. I'll go over my top 10 crazy geniuses.
The GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
The man who voiced Hades in Disney's Hercules film has an IQ of 183. which for reference, Einstein had an IQ of 160. Pretty smart fella. His name is James Woods. We're going to move into my top 10 crazy geniuses. Hopefully we'll be focusing more on the crazy part, as that is what I prefer to talk about. Alright, number 10, Salvador Dali. This is a famous Spanish painter. For those who don't know him, you've probably seen the painting where it's a bunch of melting clocks. He did that one and some other surrealist art. He was no doubt a genius, but he was also no doubt an insane person. We'll start off lightly. He believed that he was the reincarnation of his older brother, who was also named Salvador, who had died 9 months before Salvador Dali was born. So not everybody who believes in reincarnation is insane, but it should also be noticed that he had a phobia of grasshoppers. As a child, it was known that his classmates would throw them at him to torment him, and it is said that this gave him a sort of delusion that made him believe that insects were under his skin. Finally, in the year 1947, he came to the conclusion that he was possessed. He eventually hired a man to perform an exorcism on him, and he even gave him a crucifix sculpture as payment. All you have to do is look at the man's art to know he's a genius, and all you have to do is read his life story to know that he's insane. Alright, number 9. Winston Churchill. Now this is a guy you either love or you hate. I happen to love him. If for no other reason than he's kind of just a bizarre character. Beyond his flamboyant personality, he is also said to parade around in his office, completely naked while smoking a cigar. In fact, it is also said that he met Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his son Elliot Roosevelt while he was naked. All he was doing was smoking a cigar in his office and yelling at one of his secretaries, who was a male secretary. He also famously suffered from many kind of funny accidents. They're only funny because he survived most of them. He once jumped off a bridge and suffered a ruptured kidney and a concussion. While in the U.S., he was also hit by a car in New York City. When he woke up, he said he forgot to look both ways before crossing the street. While attempting to learn how to fly, he crashed his plane. And finally, this isn't so much a crazy or insane thing, it's just kind of a fun fact for you. He invented the phrase OMG, as short for, oh, my God. So this happened in a correspondence between him and Lord Fisher in 1917. The first occurrence of the acronym, but certainly not the last. Number 8. This is going to be Benjamin Franklin, the great inventor, writer, founding father. Of course, he was also crazy. He practiced what he called air bathing, which is basically a belief that being cooped up all winter is what leads to sickness. So what he would do is he would sit in his open window naked in order to help with the circulation of air around him. He believed that made him have better health, which is kind of odd. He also argued with himself in order to solve problems using sock puppetry. So he would have several sock puppets and make them argue. And sometimes he himself would interject, making it a three-way argue. It's well known that he flew a key on the end of a kite in order to discover how electricity works. But that wasn't his only electric study. That was kind of crazy. He also did one called Kill and Cook a Turkey with Electricity, which did not work out well. It killed the turkey. It did not cook it. It also nearly killed him. In 1998, it was found that he had a large number of bodies in his basement, which are presumed to have been taken from graveyards in order to aid his study of anatomy. So he grave robbed bodies. They won't tell you that in history class. And finally, he was only attracted to extremely old women, which is not crazy, just irregular. He wrote, quote, "In all your amours, you should prefer old women to young ones, because there is no hazard of children, which irregularly produced may be attended with much inconvenience, because through more experience they are more prudent and discreet in conducting an intrigue to prevent suspicion, and lastly, they are so grateful." That's a brilliant quote on why you should only, flaunt yourself with older ladies. Alright, number 7, Pythagoras, who was the ancient Greek mathematician who lived around 600 BC to 500 BC. He is obviously most well known for the Pythagorean theorem, but what is not well known is that he was actually a cult leader. So this all began when he started a school where he taught his students that numbers are the center of the universe and should be worshipped as such. He went on to teach them that he is literally the Son of God. He flaunted his numerical ability as his sort of mystical powers, his miracle working, and they actually fell for it, because of course he was a genius. He also claimed that he had been reincarnated multiple times, being the son of Hermes, who gifted him with the power of knowing all his past lives. Now, how did he convince people to join his cult? He would show them his thigh, which is said to have been golden, and impress anybody who was wary of joining his cult. It should be noted that there's not a whole lot of proof for that last part. It's all urban legend. Ancient Greek urban legend. Finally, he was deathly opposed to fava beans. Part of his religion said that eating fava beans gave you gas, and expelling gas took away your, quote, breath of life, which is basically him claiming that they contained the souls of the dead. Perhaps he should have just stuck with triangles. Alright, number 6. So, number 6, Charlie Chaplin. Kind of a goofy old chap if you ever seen his old films. They're fairly entertaining, clearly a genius. But he kind of took advantage of that in the wrong way. 3 times he married teenagers. That would be a 17-year-old, later a 16-year-old, and then by the time he was 54, he married another 18-year-old, which is slightly odd. Beyond that, it's said that he slept with over 2,000 different women over his lifetime. Finally, it's said that while he was casting women, he would, quote, throw pies at them. So, not a very nice person, although he is funny. I just imagine a struggling actress doing a very emotional scene and then getting a pie thrown at her by one of the richest people in Hollywood. Kind of funny, kind of sad. Really sad, actually. Alright, let's move on. Alright, number 5, Leonardo Da Vinci. Some of his more exotic escapades are well known. He is known for dissecting more cadavers than any contemporary doctor of the time. He did this in order to make his art, quote, more accurate. So he would study bodies in order to make his paintings more accurate. He had several nutty inventions, including a mechanical knight, which was initially built in order to replace the modern soldier, but ended up just being used as a prop at parties to entertain his guests. Beyond that, it is also theorized that Da Vinci had clowns behind him while he was painting the Mona Lisa in order to get the model to smile, which is pretty funny. Number 4, Empedocles. Most people don't know this fella, but he was a genius. He was one of the first people to discover that light travels at a speed, and that Earth is a sphere. He also discovered centrifugal force, and that air is a substance, not an absence of substance. And he was also one of the formers of the Italian School of Medicine. However, his insanity did grow as a result of his genius, as he believed he was a god. One day, in order to prove that he was a god, he went to a volcano and threw himself into it. He had many disciples at that point, and he was trying to prove to them that he was immortal. He believed he would come back as a god after being consumed by the fire. However, the volcano simply spit one of his sandals back out, and the rest of him was never seen again, and his disciples were forever proven that he is not a god. Alright, number 3. Vincent Van Gogh. Now, it's known that this young fella had a lot of problems that started out when he was young. He was always known to be mentally unstable, despite the fact that he was one of the greatest painters of all time and certainly one of the most influential. There's a lot of craziness throughout his life, but most of it is depressing, so I'll just do the most well-known and slightly comical one in retrospect. He cut his own ear off once in despair because he asked a girl to marry him and she said no. Kind of a sad story. It's also said that after he cut his ear off, he was depressed for an entire week, and then all of a sudden randomly found faith in Jesus Christ of Nazareth. Many people made fun of him because he had said that he did not like Jesus at all before that, and all of a sudden he changed his mind. Not entirely insane, but worth a mention. Number 2, Lord Byron. So for those who don't know, he is an English poet. I've never read his poetry, but I've heard it's fantastic. In fact, he's said to be only second to Shakespeare when it comes to English poetry. Despite this, he was slightly insane, but always in a comical manner. Eventually, he arrived at Cambridge College with his pet dog, but unfortunately, owning a dog was against school rules, so he had to send it back home. He was very upset at this, and as a response, it's pretty genius what he did. He noticed that there were no references to bears in the rules for Cambridge, so what he did is he bought a bear, and it stayed with him in his dorm room. It's said that he took it on regular leashed walks around the university, making sure to terrify as many students and lecturers as possible. He was then angrily questioned by many people on campus, and he would always respond that this was in an effort to get his beast a fellowship. His animal craziness did not stop there. One of his buddies said that once he left college, he had, quote, 10 horses, 8 enormous dogs, 3 monkeys, 5 cats, an eagle, a crow, and a falcon. So he basically formed an in-house zoo, which is frankly kind of fun. I don't think that's too crazy. Why is that all the way at number 2, you might ask? Okay, let's go to number 1. First, a few honorable mentions. I kept out everybody on the mad scientist list I did last week, so if you want some more insane geniuses, go back and watch that. Nikola Tesla was number 1 because he married a pigeon, which I think is just beautiful. Alright, moving on to number 1 in our insanity list. Insane geniuses. Yukio Mishima, the Japanese author. By age 12, it is said that he had acquired a comprehensive knowledge equal to that of Oscar Wilde. By 24, he was outselling any other Japanese author. And over the next 20 years, he produced 20 more major works and was nominated for 3 Nobel Prizes, and is recognized as one of the greatest novelists in Japanese history. But as one of our previously mentioned geniuses, he thought fit to make a cult for himself, which consisted exclusively of, quote, himself and homoerotically well-physiqued teenage boys. They all spent their time lifting weights, practicing martial arts, and swearing their unconditional devotion to the Emperor of Japan. So this took place in 1970, post-World War II, so the Emperor didn't have a whole lot of power, and he thought that was not alright. So what did he do one day? He decided to take 4 of the homoerotically well-physiqued teenage boys and raid the Japanese Defense Headquarters with just 1 sword. Despite this, the Emperor himself was actually embarrassed by the cult, and he publicly refuted this activity as well as his own divinity. And he eventually asked Mishima and his group of young teenage boys to leave him alone. Now, a lot of people thought that Mishima was actually just kidding, and that his revolution was too jocular in order to be taken seriously whatsoever. However, once he received the response from the Emperor, he went back inside and committed seppuku. So, that was his end. Which is a sad way to end. Clearly he had some mental issues, but anyways, that's where we're gonna end. I'd like to thank you for listening to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I will also ask that you please subscribe to the show, leave a comment below, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I will see you later on this week. Have a good night.